Hey, folks.
Hey there, Steve.
Kind of curious how many people will get today with it Friday before 4th of July. Let's see.
I think we've been thin this whole summer long. Everybody
Yeah,
hits
summer's just-
holidays.
With the weather being what it is, at least in Seattle, which is usually the cooler part of the country, I think people are hiding inside.
Hey there, Justin. Good to see you.
Hello.
Hey, Justin. Check in for Malin, Niaz, and folks. And just as a reminder, we'll talk about when some other people show, but if we're waiting for others, if you can, we're going to do another time for our folks in Asia and our UK counterparts here to be able to join. So there's a new doodle poll out.
Before I forget about it, Steve, I know you're talking about getting the videos uploaded to YouTube. Did that happen? Because I don't think I saw them in the CNCF channel, but I could just
It
be
should
missing
be
it
in
on my side.
CNCF Notary.
Is there a separate channel just for Notary?
I uploaded to the same location that they were before. I didn't get them all done. I'm working backwards, so I think I got 3 or 4 of them up. It's in, if we look at the hack doc, it says YouTube channel for recording, and it's not showing. That's interesting. Okay, well, now I'm confused. Oh, wait. Is this in order? Does that look at, how do you sort by order here? (2021) 06. Okay, hold on. Well, let me multitask and look that up, because I did post a few, but I was multitasking other meetings and apparently I did something wrong. And Melinda's here, so Melinda, it's kind of become your meeting.
I think you're back. I think I didn't have anything on the agenda. If we have time left, we can talk a bit about signature formats and updates on it. But I think I'm opening up the agenda right now.
Do we have any updates to the signature format discussion? I know we were working on the HackMD doc last time.
Yes, there are some updates, but I think it's still in the intermediate form. If we want to review or check the delta, we can.
Yeah, if that one is still a work in progress, then since we've got Justin here, I'm thinking governance might be a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think I want to spend majority of the time there, and if we can address concerns around it, and then if we have time left, we can spend it on signature format.
So last time, I know Steve is probably frantically looking at YouTube videos right now, but
I've stopped because I realized I wasn't paying complete attention to everything, and I can do that offline.
yeah, so last time we had the governance PR got opened up, but that was done by neither of the current maintainers. So figured it might be a good thing to chat about and open this one up to see long-term how we want to govern the project. And that might be an open question. I don't know if that's to Justin, Steve, both.
Yeah, I'm looking to Justin here because he was going to handle that part of it.
I think that I think the kind of it's always it's always complicated seeding new maintainers for projects because you don't. I think most projects tend to, they tend to start off kind of with a single maintainer or a few, or maybe a company or something, and it's kind of like these are the people working on the project. It's kind of easy to see where they start. Whereas seeding maintainers for, I mean, obviously people have been active, but people's kind of interests, and activity changes over time. So I think that we need to we need to have a kind of reasonably flexible policy. I'm not sure about having like really like very strict laying it out, because I think projects evolve over time and we need to be more flexible. And I think that having to keep voting on governance things is kind of gets in the way of actually working on stuff. But so I think we need to just be a bit careful about not making it too specific and too bureaucratic. But also, I mean, I kind of see the sort of some of the concerns that have led to the wording in terms of like inactivity and things that are definitely, we've had this problem with Notary V1 that we have a bunch of inactive maintainers we need to remove, and it's always a kind of, it doesn't feel nice removing people, but it has, it has to be, and I've delayed it for too long with it, and it's like it has to be done. So I think not making it too bureaucratic and too likely that we have to change it, but flexible enough to make it clear that it's open and inclusive and that but also that things do change over time and it has to be adaptable over time is important. I mean, I see with CNCF, we see a lot of different things. There are some projects that have really strict activity requirements, and basically, unless you're a full-time employee on the project, it's very difficult to work for it. I don't, and I think that's one extreme. Whereas there's other projects that are much more informal, and there's perhaps too many inactive people on the project. So I think you can go too far in either direction. We also have the I think we want to explicitly have a governance that's reasonably hierarchical, because we want to have sub-projects that are different and we'll have different people involved in. So I think we should, from the start, have there's a kind of a process that allows for a process for having new sub-projects and and for having separate maintainers and having those be able to act autonomously. So for example, we want to have a project to work on tough in registries, which is separate from like the individual image signing, and so those would probably have different local maintainers, and we could either do the all maintainers roll up as aggregate project maintainers, or will you do a thing where it's like some of them do? I think there's a few models there as well. So I think we should address the sub projects piece up front too. And there's also, we've got Notary V1 as a sub project as well. So like, again, it's the same kind of thing where originally it was just one, it was a single repo project. So it was a little bit different from what we want now. But I can kind of draft something based on those kinds of requirements if that's helpful.
I think that at least for me, I think that I agree that making the governance as simple a process as possible is definitely ideal, because we want to be writing code, not governance issues as much as possible. I think my two kind of biggest concerns coming into this were, I think one of them is like in some way the easier to solve is just having more people able to merge stuff on GitHub, just so that lowers the burden for the people who can do it, and it also just makes, I think, stuff move faster. And the second one, I think, is definitely just a clear decision-making process, because I've been caught off guard a lot of times, I think, by decisions coming out of the project. Like there was an announcement recently of an upcoming release, which I feel like doesn't really jive with my understanding from being in all of these meetings of where the project is right now. I'm like still in like a requirements phase and like prototyping. And I think just making sure that that stuff is clear, at least it's clear that who is doing that and what's going on there, just so that we know, like all the contributors to this project can understand like where this all is coming from. It'd be really nice.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. Yeah, I think that yeah, absolutely. I think that would definitely, yeah, I think definitely we need to make it clearer what the decision-making process is, and yeah.
And the only thing about the maintainers, and I apologize because I wound up being off 2 consecutive weeks as opposed to off, on, off again, but the only reason we haven't added more to the ones that, as we reshuffled some things, is because I was just waiting to get the governance piece in place. So other than me physically not being here, I don't think, for that period of time, I don't think we've been blocked at anything we wanted to merge, but that it's just leaning into, let's get this solved, and then we'll have the additional maintainers. So somebody being off or somebody being busy doesn't block progress.
Yeah, exactly. I think part of the idea is that you can take a 2-week vacation, and it's not. I mean, that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
For the project.
I don't.
Any one person goes away.
I just want to explain the ordering and why we haven't added anybody else yet.
Yeah.
Because I think, Marina, you are on one of the repos. It's just I shuffled the repos for some feedback, and we haven't finished up the governance part yet.
I mean, I guess roughly how many maintainers do we think we want? I guess that's a good thing as well to discuss. Like, is it? I mean,
it's a total arbitrary number. I'd say like 5, because I think it's small enough that it's reasonable, and odd numbers are always nice in case stuff goes badly. But that's just a random number. So
yeah. I mean, I think for distribution, when we were moving it to CNCF, I kind of added like anyone, and I think we have like 12 maintainers now, which is quite a lot, and some of them are clearly not active. But part of the reason for doing that was I wasn't sure which of them were really going to be active, even though they said they were, because it was kind of it had been an internal Docker project and it was moving to a CNCF project. It was like, well, I'm just going to give everyone, we can always remove people later if they're not active, or maybe they'll have time later, or there's a particular areas they're working on, things like that. So I just went a bit overboard and went for 12. I think it's 12, maybe it's another one, maybe it's 13. It's a lot. I think it's difficult to have a community with that many people actively maintaining, or like some of the CNCF projects actually do have more maintainers than that. gRPC has 20 something maintainers, but they're like all the team working on it at Google, basically. So it's kind of a little different.
With the governance PR that's currently sitting out there, it has the comment in there, 3 months inactivity, that you automatically get moved into like a former maintainer status. Does it make sense to say there's no hard upper limit, but we want to have at least 5, but if there are more people that show up that want to participate, as long as they're participating, they're in?
I don't think I definitely don't want to. Yeah, we shouldn't have hard upper limits on maintainers. That's just like inflexible. There's no reason to have that. If you don't want to add another maintainer, the maintainers vote no for them. So I don't. We definitely. That's why I think like all those arbitrary limits and stuff, you should turn into just flexible process, not limits written here. Otherwise, you'll just want to change it. Like you have to open a PR to change it to 6, add another maintainer. Like it's just more votes than you need. It's just overhead. So I think I'm not in favor of putting any kind of, just simplify it drastically, I'd say.
Yep.
All right, so this all makes sense. So it sounds like basically we can simplify governance a bit and just work on finding whatever first set of maintainers, whatever number of people, works. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, and a lot of my goal on this was less get a whole lot more maintainers on the project and more just make sure there was that flow of when someone puts the PR out there, they either get like a thumbs up, thumbs down, they know where the process is going, they know when they'll get merged, if they'll get merged, rather than having things sit in limbo.
Yeah, completely. And I think that, yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
On a slightly related but different note, I think I also, if folks are willing, want to have a bit of discussion about kind of deliverables from the project. Because I know we've been going in, various different directions here, and there's, there's a bunch of different pressures that different people have, and I just want to make sure that we are on the same page about what the goals and deliverables here are. Because I'll speak for myself. From my perspective, I think that there's still some work to be done defining the security goals and setups, like in like the threat model and those kind of things for the project. I think we're making good progress there, but it doesn't, like there's still work being done there. And so the way I see it, it seems like the project is a little bit of a ways from having an implementation that meets all of the goals of the project. And even from deciding, what the goals are to make something interoperable with something that could have all of the goals of the project. I mean, like we don't have to have 100% of the code written. It's just that without all the requirements, I think it'd be hard to even figure out how to interoperate with the final solution. So I don't know, what are people's thoughts? Like where does everyone else stand on this issue?
I don't think that I don't think that I think there's enough pressures to ship something that we will ship something that's not that's probably not the same shape as a solution that would solve all the issues. I mean, I think when I talked to you a while back, and I think that that my kind of version of it was that it's like if we ship the equivalent of commit signing, it's not the same as say shipping something that handles tough, but they're not incompatible in the sense that you can combine the two later, you can do other things, but they're not one isn't a solution that's a part of the way to the other necessarily, but they're not one like commit signing solves a set of threat models that's a subset of a larger set of threat models. But right now the things I think that my feeling from talking to customers is that they right now are only asking for their threat models they're thinking about are not all the threat models they could be thinking about. They have a set of things that they do want to get some solutions to in the short term, because they are the ones they're concerned about, and like we'll have to iterate over time to build different solutions over time that solve different problems.
I mean, that makes sense, but I worry about releasing something that has like less security than Notary v1 and like giving people the impression that it's, because I think that could be really confusing to people who say, oh, this is the new version of Notary, it must have at least the security features of the previous one. So I don't know what we can do.
I
To
mean, I don't know. I arguably, arguably Notary V1 does not really have all the security features it says it does because of some design decisions like trust on first use and various limitations on things like signature mobility between registries that effectively mean that, and the general low adoption, which is partly related to some of those to not being able to move signatures, that it's not delivering that to the end user because largely because they're not using it. But I mean, and like, so it's like something that's not used provides zero security.
I mean, I agree. I mean, that's like why we're here, right? I think to solve those problems, right, to make a solution that can actually.
But also, no one understood the. I'm talking to a lot of people using Notary V1, and very few people understood what the security guarantees were at all. I think there's this thing that signing is a very loaded term for people, and they make extremely strong assumptions about what it means, which are often not at all justified by anything. But they have a mental model of it which does not correspond, in fact, to a bunch of stuff, and it's and which is problematic. Like, I think user understandability of security is a big problem. So I don't think that people thought. I don't think in general most people think that they would get the things that they might have got from Notary V1 if they did use it. So I'm not sure that's a really big problem, but I do think we need to. I totally agree, and I promised you I would write some documents. I think we need to lay out a roadmap of what the other thing, what things we could do and how we potentially integrate with other things, and what relationship within in data, all those kinds of relationship with TAF, because all those things are really important for people to understand. And I think that we should have frequently asked questions type things about that as well, in terms of what we're rolling out and what we're not rolling out initially, and why. And
so I think there's nothing wrong with having just like an intermediate solution that we can do now, which is just signing. Doesn't have these extra security properties, but it provides like, well, you can check a box basically say that you're signing your code, and it provides marginal more security than TLS because you control the keys. But the problem is that I have is if we put both these things in the same umbrella of Notary, I just feel like that's very confusing, and people won't understand what security properties they're getting from one thing versus another, and what.
Well, I mean, we just. I mean, I discussed with Steve a while ago, like having potentially having different names for the different things. So I think my suggestion was that I think I was Notation and Notorious were my other two sub projects for other things. But I think that we could we could do something that makes it less of a V1 V2 and more of a his signing sub projects that are part of the Notary project that have a connection. I think that those things are all definitely and then we can have lots more sub projects too. I mean, like I do think that we the aim of this is not to have one project, it's to have a set of tools for container security things, as part of it. And I'm like, I think that there's all sorts of potential bits of there's no reason why it should be kind of like his V1, his V2, his V3 kind of thing. It can go in multiple, and that makes it easier to experiment and see which things are successful. I think usage and success is in terms of usage is solving actual problems is the important metric.
I
Yeah, I
think
think
one of the things we've talked about is like, having additional capabilities. Like, we're seeing more divergence on what customers want for their internal projects, the custom apps they build and deploy internally, versus what they want from what they consume from Docker Hub, Quay, NVIDIA.
Yeah, no, yeah, completely. I was kind of. I mean, I think that there's definitely a big difference between consuming upstream published content versus building a secure pipeline for myself. And I think that, again, that's when I talked to you before, Marina, that was part of the split that I put it in. It was that pipeline security, where in fact a lot of the initial things people are asking for are around in toto rather than TAF, but like those kind of things about what came from it. But I mean, I think, but that's all to do with that pipeline security rather than external content security, which is different. And the producers are different, because a lot of people are not producing content for that kind of consumption, but people like Microsoft do publish a lot of that, and that's where a lot of those requirements come from.
Yeah, to kind of go back to Marina's original question of what are we delivering? I feel like in my mind, the thing that we're delivering should be an interoperable specification. And so anybody can implement whatever they want to based on that specification. And then what we're trying to work on is maybe, we've done a few prototypes. I imagine there's going to be another one come up here later on this year. I don't know if we still want to call it prototype, call it something else, whatever we want to call it. But I don't know if it's fair to call it.
We'll start putting things in main and then split releases out from that. So that is like, there shouldn't be the next prototype is not a prototype. It's what's in main, and then we'll decide when we cut a release, I think, is where all the feedback was.
Yeah, I think the challenge we have is that because there already is a V1, that it's challenging to go back and say, okay, we're not doing the 0.1, 0.2 and just iteratively getting close to a final GA release. So we're going to say, okay, this is the final thing. So it's just might be complicated figuring out naming and numbering, but otherwise, I understand where you're going.
I think that having a different name might make things easier. I don't know. That's what I was thinking. But we should think about that.
Yeah, okay, so going back to the version release, so what exactly are we releasing? Because I know that there's a lot of things that were put in the prototypes that we keep talking about whether or not they're design decisions, and I know that there was a lot of discussion that we can change these prototypes as we make the other decisions, but once we make a release, that's no longer the case. So I really think at least things like the signing envelope, like formats type stuff really needs to be decided before we can make that release. So like what are our what's the point at which we can do that?
It's a great topic for one of the agenda items. So because the envelope conversation is something that I've just, as I've been coming back and engaging and seeing what's been going on, there's been a lot of great discussions there. But before we jump to that, I think we've talked about release dates and what does that mean, and not just release dates per se, but like what are the milestones we want to shoot for. And as we've looked at the difference between public registries, aggregators, and private registry, and it's not just private registries, because private registries consume public content, but private deployments within a company, right? The Acme Rockets environment versus what Wabbit Networks deploys. We definitely need to see, what we've seen is customers need signing. They need to know they can consume public content. But they want to bring it into their environment, and once they bring it into their environment, they've taken ownership of it, and then they want to manage it within their environment with signing. The revocation scenarios are critically important for the public software registries. They haven't been as high a priority for customers within their environment. So I think what we're trying to land for this fall is the ability to sign content so that customers cannot, the problem is they can use digest today, but of course, every digest changes. So what does that really mean? They have to go someplace to know what the digest should be. So that's not a scalable thing. They need to know that if all content signed with this key is considered valid until it's considered not. So there's a minor revocation of keys there. But the point is, if we can give that capability for internal teams, they're starting to hit the check boxes. They're starting to be able to get their production security people ability to allow them to move forward. The revocation things that I think, sorry, I see Brady, you want to jump in.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say,
I'll get the two.
I think that that'll work fine for internal teams, but I really think, I mean, like we were saying, there's different sets of requirements for different people. And I think this might be a piece of that, but without a real key distribution solution, which includes revocation and also just getting the keys in the first place through delegations or whatever else, like it won't work outside the scope of a private company that can just, you know, hand you a key and say, use this one because, you know, I'm your boss or you know, whatever the case may be. Oh, I think you're muted, sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say is a second bucket. I just wanted to create the two buckets to facilitate that exact conversation. It's key signing, you know, is a core piece, which public registries do as well, but public registries will also need revocation. Some large internal, well, not large per se, some small companies for their internal distribution will also want revocation. Don't get me wrong, they're not exclusive of each other. It's just where is the priority pivot. So I think if we enable both, I don't want to call it split because they're additional capabilities. So it's that if we can deliver that layering, then I think we have something to start releasing and starting to get more feedback and starting to learn from.
Yeah, because I think if we have a signature envelope and a way to put that in registries, you can use that just at kind of what in the tough terminology you would call the targets level, which is kind of the initial, you're just signing the metadata, uploading it, it's there. And then you could add on those other pieces of, for example, the tough metadata. You can say, okay, we also want a notion of timeliness. Let's add this additional piece on. We can add snapshots or consistency across it. If you want that piece, you can add that on. And then of course, delegations and stuff just for key distribution. I think that kind of makes sense to me. I think the most important thing in my opinion is whatever we decide, just making sure it's well documented and clear to folks. It's kind of my main, I don't know, if I have a point, I guess that's it.
No, it's fair. I did try to capture this. If you look at Notary Project, there is a projects using the GitHub capabilities that we're trying to set some milestones there. I got so far with it several weeks ago. I have to go back and look, but I tried to outline some of those things. Like that's where I was trying to put the initial prototypes. And I thought I put more in there related to what we would do in splitting the ability to ship additional capabilities, such as here's core key signing, and then here's revocations. I have to go back and look at it. In fact, I'll do it right now because that I can easily find. Projects.
I see the projects there. I just don't see any cards in it.
I just want to add that kind of concurring that I think I strongly want to see like an incremental model where we deliver something and then we can layer features on top of it. And if we can define what these milestones are, that'll kind of put everybody on the same page.
Sorry, Melinda, I just was pasting and didn't hear everything you said. But for one of the things that I realized, because we're going to have multiple projects, and I wanted to make sure we had a higher level roadmap. I realized that GitHub actually has a projects capability at the root of the org. So that's the link I just pasted there. So that's where you'll find the cards. So there's a Notary V2 project that has, you can see some, things in progress, which that one should actually be moved, and what's done. And then the roadmap and dependencies, that's where I started to put stuff in there. I'm by no means saying this is, the definitive thing. This was me getting something up for discussion, which would be a great topic for us to have, on a call like this. But I wanted to put something in place to try to answer these exact questions. So we can create issues on the roadmap, I guess, if you want, however we want to facilitate that conversation. But I think high level, just to answer the question, because I did see your comment, Marina. Do people feel comfortable with doing that split? I mean, we all are feeling, for people like Marina and others that have been in this space for much longer than some of us, they're like, I've been talking about this forever. I'm glad you're finally paying attention. But over the last year, whether it be SolarWinds, whether it be because containers are moving, not moving, have been in more production more and more every month. It continues to be a higher level priority. SolarWinds certainly elevated it. The White House executive order certainly elevates it to another level. So we definitely have both customer pressure and government pressure to ship, a level of security that continues to make incremental progress. And the only last piece that I'll say before, just kind of hand it back out is, I think one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is how do we make sure we have a good componentized model that no one project is trying to boil the ocean for all, and that there's a clear ability for things to interoperate. And, I was starting to call it CDC, which of course is a different problem. That there's the creation, distribution, and consumption. And I think that this SIG security white paper, or the CNCF white paper, had a different categorization of those three. But I feel like often we focus on the creation and the consumption, and as if our grandparents are going to be doing repeatable builds before they install it on their phone. And obviously they're not going to do that. So there is the creation, and then the output of the creation gets distributed. And it has to get distributed in a way that there's some integrity, around that, so that when consumption is done, people aren't, on consumption recompiling. They're taking a look at how it was distributed, and is the integrity still intact? And there's lots of other checksums they can do on it, because looking at SBOMs and so forth. But the point is that if we think about those three, the way I think about Notary is, and this is my thoughts, and I want to hear what other people think, is we're really focused on the distribution. Like whatever happens in build, great, but it's the output of the build that we can put some integrity around the distribution. And then on consumption, there's enough information there to do the appropriate amount of validation. So if I think of the in toto stuff and stuff from the left, if you will, that feeds into what we would package in distribution and then ship it on its way.
I'm not sure it's quite that clear cut, because I think talking to people, talking to customers, a lot of again, this sort of what they're expecting to get from an ecosystem is like actually the often the pieces that in toto gives are actually more what they're thinking about than some of the other bits. So I think it's actually a little bit more complicated about like, I think we're what we're doing is packaging. Yes, we're packaging and distributing information about trust, but there's overall with different, slightly different types of mechanisms for that. But that's I think that's we're kind of standards for packaging and distributing trust is kind of the way I see it overall. And it's like,
if you think about it, so one of the ways I've been thinking about this is like the SBOMs. So in toto would generate, like, instead of the Notary V2 signature having attributes for everything in the world, including what security scan results might be in it or whatever, the thought process was we enable the ability to put a stamp of integrity on it, kind of like that sealed piece of tape that goes on the cardboard box, and the seal is broken, you got a problem. But what we would be able to sign is not just the container image, but sign the SBOM, sign the security scan results, sign all the things, so that the output of the build system, whether it's in toto or something else, the point is not as important. We'll just make sure that whatever that output system, as it gets distributed to the endpoint, it can be validated with an amount of integrity. Does that account for what? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to kind of tag on to that I know that like TreeTrunk especially has spent a lot of time looking at, if you have this secure supply chain, that's great, but you also need to secure how you give all that good information to the end user, which is where you need like the secure transport mechanism, which he did with Tough, and I think that provides a lot of these good security features. But basically, you need to do something to secure that last mile of the transmitting of all of this information about the supply chain.
Yeah, I tend to agree that this is falling in distribution. It's just a question of maybe terminology of whether or not that stamp of authenticity is part of the build or part of the distribution. And I think that's just getting down to semantics.
I mean, the build definitely creates a signature, or the build can create the initial signature. In fact, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to support offline signature creation, so that you can build in a completely ephemeral, I want to say sanitized or airlocked environment of some sort. And only after you've built and signed and everything, and you can do some checks on there, does it actually leave that environment to be distributed. And then as it moves across the ecosystem, as this small company that nobody ever heard of called Wabbit Networks publishes out to Docker Hub, and Docker Hub has some trust around it, Docker Hub will add a signature to it as part of their certification process. And there is some trust that companies might have there. But even that within Acme, they don't fully trust that within that environment. There's a importing process where they scan and do whatever it is that they want to do to say, yep, I'm glad that Docker Hub said this was good, but here's our policies inside of Acme. And only after that, then they stamp its signature on it to kind of say, all right, as this moves, this is the airport analogy, right? When you're in, once you're past security, they don't look at your passport. They look at the TSA stamp on your boarding pass. They could always go back and say, hey, where'd you get that stamp? It looks like you sketched it yourself. Now produce your boarding pass. So there's a way to go back and do it, but there's those multiple levels of checks. So I don't know, that's kind of what I was thinking of as the creation. And I got to remember the terminology used in the CNCF paper because CDC doesn't really work here. But there's those handoffs as it moves between. Does that resonate to folks? Does that cover what you were thinking, Justin, in the sense of how to cover both? Or is there something more to it that I...
Well, I think, I don't know, I think, yeah, some of it's semantics, but I think, yeah.
I think one of the things I would kind of add in here is that what we really are expecting from signing really is just a contract saying that this person uploaded something into the registry, and it's up to whoever uploaded into the registry to make any additional assertions that they want to make to. Whether they sign at build, whether they sign after testing, whenever they want to sign, it's up to them. Really, the purpose of signing here is to say that, when we get something from any registry, and even looking at sort of like, multiple registry solutions now, we know verifiably that this came from the source. Anything beyond that is something that's incremental and can always be built on top. And I think it should be an option for whoever is publishing those artifacts to make those assertions. And from a usability perspective, it's up to whoever's consuming those artifacts to decide what assertions they look for. But at the very basic, I think as artifacts move through registries, we need to be able to provide that assertion of who uploaded it. And that really should be what signing kind of encompasses here as the first step.
So Marina, I
Makes
know
sense to
that
me.
you had raised the concern. Does that help you feel a little more comfortable about what we're talking about here?
I think a little bit. I think we're still talking about a lot of different things, but I think in some ways they're all important things. It's just there are a lot of different things that need to be done, and I think they could all be done in a single system. But I definitely think that would take some designing and some time for all of us, which is kind of my yeah. But like there's a whole thing with security solutions in general, where if you're building on top of existing stuff, there are security properties it's impossible to add at that point in time. And that's my real, my main concern with releasing something now. I get that we can make incremental changes. Not everybody needs every property, but I worry that we won't be able to add some of the properties we need if we don't do this first step very carefully. So that kind of sums up my concern at this stage.
Kind of like extensibility, making sure we have extensibility built in.
Yeah, and because for example, how you discoverability can be a part of can tie into key distribution. And so I want to make sure that the way we do discoverability doesn't then mess up options for key, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's my concern at this stage. Yeah.
I think the pushback I would have there is that there are multiple ways to do some of those other problems, right? When you think about key distribution, or when you think about supply chain attestations, we don't need a single standard solution for that per se. There's already open source solutions for key distribution. There's solutions that exist in the cloud for key distribution, some paid, some free. So I think that there we want to have the flexibility. At the core, what we really need here to kind of layer on different key management solutions or layer on different supply chain assertion tracking solutions is really that signing, because that's really the only part that we need the registry to provide. Everything else on beyond that, I see value in kind of like, working on a solution that, extends over that and builds over time. But at this point, we do have other solutions that provide that. And this really, the only part that's really missing here in tying all of that together is the standard spec for getting signatures into a registry. Because you can't track what's happening within a registry if you don't have a scalable solution that works for everyone there.
Yeah, and I think that in some ways, I think I agree. I think that you can build a lot of those on by, if you're able to sign arbitrary things, you can then put arbitrary things in those arbitrary things and use that to build the rest of these things. It's just something I want to make sure we're thinking about as we make any firm decisions, is how this would extend to the other things. And I think that's part of why it's nice to have as much as possible some of these future goals defined now, even if we don't do them this second, just have them defined and ideas about that so that we know what we are and aren't leaving open.
I think this is where we're trying to capture issues to make sure we don't, like, tag signing is something that we know we want to do. And Brandon brought up some great points about that a while ago. So we've captured that. We haven't solved it yet because we've been kind of working on some of the things, but that's definitely something we want and need to do. We did from the very beginning, for instance, we've always said that key management or key vault, where the keys are is an extensibility thing, because this is part of what was wrapped up in Notary V1. So a customer that's using Azure should be able to use the Azure Key Vault. A customer using AWS should be able to use AWS's Key Vault. Somebody that's on-prem might want to use HashiCorp's Key Vault. Whatever that part needs to absolutely be pluggable with a common contract, so they're not writing completely different code every time they use something different. The same thing with revocation, right there. And just as we're thinking about this, that you might have the tough extension for revocation, and it just something completely off the wall. Like they didn't see me be like, oh, it makes sense. So maybe that wasn't the best idea. But the idea is that you'd have this extensibility. And without, we actually do have a bit of chunk of time, in the envelope format. One of the things that was discussed earlier this week when I was catching up was, can we align with some of the stuff that the In-Toto folks were doing around DSSE? And one of the questions is like, do they have an extensibility model so we can add things like TSA and some other stuff? I can't remember exactly. I'll defer to Melinda and Niaz on what exactly those properties were, so that we have exactly what we have to have extensibility built in. If we've learned anything from some of the stuff in the image and distribution specs, is the pressure of not having a built-in extensibility requires some kind of version bump to say here's what's possible, is overly limiting. So let's build in that capability up front so that there's no stifling of innovation. The innovation continues, and then as the innovation evolves, it can merge into the standard.
I feel like we need like extensibility with limits. I feel like extensibility where we avoid things like the alg equals none, like specific things that we can't extend. But yeah, generally I agree. I'm just throwing that out there.
So one thing I want to make sure that we don't lose track of here is we kind of talked at a high level. There's stuff we want to include in the governance documentation there. And I just want to make sure we're talking a lot of high level decisions of these are directions we want to go and things we want to do. But I also want to make sure that what are the immediate next steps for getting the governance thing finalized, getting that moved on, and getting, making sure we can make some headway on getting these PRs merged and deciding on like the signature format and that kind of stuff, getting those things moving along. That probably like the following step after that.
Yeah, I will sort out the governance piece, and I'll talk to you if there's anything, but I can just I can draft some variant of that's kind of simpler, and I think solves all the issues that we actually want to have.
Okay, so in terms of the poll 78, the one that was sitting out there in Throne, are we thinking of going a different direction from that? Is that where you're going right now?
Well, I think it needs to be a lot simpler. Okay. And I think it potentially needs to be, it needs to reflect that it's not a single project. Potentially,
Okay.
I need to think about what we do with this. It's a set of projects which might have separate project maintainers, and how we want to relate those to the overall maintainers. There's a few patterns for that.
Some we could learn from, some we could learn from what to or not to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the issues, and I immediately thought of all the OCI challenges that have been going on these days. So, the more we can avoid that, the better.
Often the most valuable lessons are the things that when things go wrong is how to do it right. Those are easier to learn from. But there's definitely some things we can do there. And I think having the hierarchical part is one of the most important ones. So we don't block. There's a way to create new projects, and then that project team owns their own destiny. And that's one of the things that we really want to make sure we enable.
Yeah, definitely.
Linda, I saw you just added a bullet in there. Did you want to try to chat about that with the last 10 minutes?
I think I just wanted to put it in there for folks to review offline and provide feedback. I think the main delta is we added some requirements around signature format itself. So there is payload and signature in the requirement section that talks about what things go in the payload and what goes in the signature attributes. And then we are talking about the envelope attributes that we want from the signature format itself, like it should be able to support customer defined metadata or TSA signatures, etc. If we can, again, I don't think we have enough time to go through right now, but I think if folks can have a critical look just around the requirement section, I think we'll have good foundation to then evaluate the options that we are putting out. And if there are disagreements on the requirements, they should be surfaced now.
I think, Marina, this is the place we do want to land. Like, Shui had something initially out there, so we had something to work with. We always knew we were going to evolve it. Oh wow, actually Shui's here. Like, okay, I didn't realize that's late. But okay, anyway, sorry, just got distracted. I just saw he's there. So we want to evolve that. One of the conversations was, well, do we leverage something? Like, should we create something new? And I don't think every time there's always a high tax in creating something new. There's times where you should, and you have to, because otherwise you just don't move forward. But is there something that could be leveraged? I was hoping that we could align with some of the other work, like some of the stuff that Desi, I think it was, and Shui even recommended it first or proposed it. I really like the idea of being able to align with it. One of the challenges has been, security is a big issue. Can we, going with something new becomes a problem because, will our customers allow us to use something that hasn't been certified or whatever the right terminology is? So I think there is a big question there. And that's why, while we would really like to lean into that, and that's why there's the PR that was open and the questions that were open around extensibility. I think there's also a leaning towards here's what's already been proven and approved in the industry, and we don't have to carve off something else yet. So my opinion is I'd like to align with multiple efforts as much as possible. And I'm deferring to the crypto experts on, how do we make forward progress on which one we choose.
Marina, what's the status of the proposals for Toughen and Toto signature format?
Yeah, so that's we renamed it DISI, the Dead Simple Signing Envelope.
Okay.
I think it's officially in 1.0 now. So it's used in Toto, I believe, in practice. I don't know if Chi-Chunk's here, you can correct me there. And then in Tough, it's a non-backwards compatible change. So we want to use it in Tough, but that will take, it will be until the Tough 2.0 release before we can do so. Just because of implementation issues, but it does solve the canonicalization. Like there's no use of canonicalization in it. It doesn't. The idea was just keep it simple enough that it avoids many of the very common security pitfalls of other signing envelopes. Oh yeah, Joshua's here. He can correct me about the in Toto as well. But Yeah, so yeah, it's I think it's ready for use. It's not, again, it is new. So I understand that concern that it's not as well tested. But it was designed by people who were looking at issues with other implementations and trying to make something simple that avoided those. That's kind of the goal there.
It is new, but it's not 1,000 miles away from what was there before. Like there was a well-known, frequently voiced criticism of the kind of in toto tough signature envelope, and this was designed to address that. And that criticism was effectively that it required canonicalization, and therefore you had to include a canonicalizer in your TCB. Canonicalization implies parsing, and parsers in your TCB make people sad, quite rightly. So,
and none of the JSON canonicalization is particularly sad because
there's like 5 different versions
there were multiple specs, and none of the implementations conform to the specs anyway.
Yeah, absolutely correct.
I wanted to bring up, because we are talking about DSSC or DZ, there are a couple of issues that I think we'll have to go past. And I think most of the folks who have knowledge around it or have contributed to these threads are here. If we can pick the first one up, and we have a few minutes, I just want to hear some opinions around this. So the issue 39 that I pinged in the chat. So the requirement was, let me open it on my end. So the requirement was to add additional authenticated attributes. These could be customer specified attributes or attributes from a particular signer. So for example, AWS signer could add some additional attributes.
Yeah,
and those would be used in verification.
I think if they're authenticated metadata, they can just be added to the payload. I think that's the idea, is that we keep the actual signing envelope as simple as possible, but you can include whatever you want inside of that payload. It doesn't even have
so
to be
some of these attributes are not really related to the payload. For example, in the container signing, we are talking about probably the image manifest descriptor to go as the payload. And there'll be other attributes around it that are signature specific, that are not the payload, that are not payload specific, as in they can vary per signature. That is one. And the other is the signing service can also put in some attributes that again doesn't go into the payload itself.
But if the attributes are not needed to validate the signature, you can always add another level of indirection by having another wrapper around before the object, which is unmodified, which is just a metadata carrying wrapper. If it's needed to validate the signature, I kind of agree with the first issue that, like, if it's needed to validate the signature, then it has to be defined. Otherwise, people will ignore it, and they won't validate. Like, validating the signature correctly will become a matter of implementation correctness rather than like something you can test easily. And so, but you can always wrap a registry object with another one, which is basically a manifest list is just an indirection wrapper for another registry object if you need another layer of indirection because you want to add some signature specific metadata. But it's true that we haven't really considered that use case specifically, and maybe we should have some kind of thought for
timestamp is just a separate signature with a payload that identifies the thing being attested, and a time it doesn't require any changes to the thing being attested as far as
right. Yeah, the timestamp is a separate.
Yeah, the timestamp specifically is that's a proposed extension to DISI that is getting some traction, is adding a timestamp field there, because that does have to do with the signature validation. It's the other pieces, like even if they relate to the signature, if they don't relate to the validation, it's just nice to minimize the amount of parsing that happens before you've validated the payload, because any parsing that you do before validation is a potential vector for attack.
So I think the requirement around that was, there are two requirements. One is if customer wants to pass in a map that needs to be covered by the signature, and they use that data after the signature has been verified in any form. So for example, they want to say this artifact passed QC or passed unit tests or any additional metadata that they just don't want to have free floating. It needs to be covered by, it needs to be protected. The second is some of the signing schemes that AWS uses additional metadata that goes into the signature and is used part of verification. There's an additional verification layer outside of the basic basic trust anchor or the certificate chain verification.
Sorry, I've got to go. Maybe we probably should defer this to next week's meeting, but it would be good to have a detailed write-up of what those AWS specific things are, because that would help me understand that. Sorry, got to go.
Sure, I think
just some examples.
we can update the requirements with some details around it.
It is past, and I know everybody has to drop. So thanks, and just a reminder of the doodle poll, so we can schedule time so Shiva's not up in the middle of his night and others. And Joshua, I want to defer to the experts. Basically, this is, I'm just trying to represent what, the JWS and others, there's a concern there. So let's have the envelope conversation next week. And based on the poll, we'll figure out when that'll be. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Have a good
folks.
weekend.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks, bye.